the problem with talking about attachment styles is the problem with labeling yourself and others in general. And it's once you start to think of yourself a certain way as a self-concept, if you start to say, well, I'm anxious attached, or I'm avoidant attached, or I'm fearful avoidant, I think that this is the problem with when you start to be like, well, I'm smart, I'm not one of the pretty girls, or I'm this. And whatever you put an I am with, be very careful, because it can already start to put you into a box, and then you start to act within those limits of that box. So if you start to say, I'm anxiously attached, and then you start to kind of have this like, oh, they're avoidant, and you start to have this kind of story in your head about how people are and how you are and what you need, and you have already limited yourself. It's actually better to believe that you are secure attached, or you're becoming secure attached, and that you, no matter where, and that having a fluidity, instead of saying I am this, say I have avoidant tendencies, I have anxious tendencies, and I have secure tendencies. Because it's not so much about it, when you have a self-concept that shows that kind of helps you be your highest self, that's so much more important than being attached to these labels. It's the same with once people start going around calling everyone narcissists, and calling themselves an empath. Everybody gets limited by when they're calling themselves things, no matter how good they are, no matter how bad they are. They also get limited just in having any kind of assumptions about themselves rather than a fluidity. Like, you've got to have an identity that feels fluid in terms of personality, because that's the way that you feel you can change, you can be the best self. Otherwise, you can start making demands on people based on your identity, because you think, I'm this, You want to be able to have a strong sense of self, but a strong sense of how you can always evolve, always change, because that makes you able to be better and better. And what we have in this culture is we got a lot of obsession with identities, like we make our identity about our races and who we fuck, and our mental disorders, our mental problems. People like to define themselves by having anxiety and ADHD and anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. The fact is when you're avoidant attached, you can be anxious. It's actually a form of anxiety, but because we've called these labels avoidant and anxious, we get into we put them as different sides of the spectrum. Avoidants are anxious. Anxious people do avoid. And getting caught and thinking you're that way becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, when I say things like, if you just have to be aware of what you say about yourself can become a verdict that can ruin the potential of who you are. And it's helpful to sometimes use these labels, say, I'm an INFJ, I'm an avoidant attached, I'm an anxious attached, I'm a Scorpio, whatever. All of those things are you, and they also are not you. You can be all of the signs in astrology. You can be all of the Myers-Briggs. You are limitless. You're a lot. So just be careful with when you start to obsessively define yourself. Even when you're defining yourself as I'm non-committal, well, then you're not going to be committal, because you already put this barrier. So, or yes, you have tendencies, but allow yourself to say phrases that are more like, I'm always changing. I'm very fluid. I don't fit into a box, and then you won't fit into a box, and then you'll have a much better chance of being your best self.